determine the level. So it's not just the recruiter, right, who's not generally a technical person doing that. And besides that, as you mentioned earlier, right, a lot of the FANG companies have something known as peer companies, right, whom they value more than the non-tier one companies. So they try to, of course, match the level if they're from a peer company like Google, Amazon, Netflix, maybe Uber, Lyft too, to a certain extent. So you kind of have a slight feeling that maybe you'll slightly get matched to the role. But if you're from a non-tech industry like finance or something, they don't try to match your level in finance. But if it's a peer tier one company, they do try to come close to your current level. And then there's always this thing where your interview can go up one level or down one level based on your performance.
Makes sense. Makes sense. So though I suppose these decisions are not made for every single candidate like that. When I apply as a candidate, like the recruiter has some guideline. I'm guessing that the guidelines have been prepared by engineers and recruiters and managers before, right? That's what you
Of
mean?
course, yeah. That is also there. There's an initial decision the recruiter makes, right? Then I think if the recruiter gives the go ahead, right, then there's an initial leveling which is decided by a group of a bigger group than just the recruiter. So maybe if once the recruiter clears them, right, and says, oh yeah, you're okay to go to the phone interview, then it goes to the internal group to determine an initial level.
Sure, got it. Then the other thing that we used to do at Box, and generally I've also seen, is that we wouldn't proactively share what level. Generally, it will be fairly clear, like you said. If you're coming from a senior software engineer, then obviously we will try and match to that level, assuming we consider that it is sort of the same type of work or similar type of work, that software engineering work, or whichever role is being matched. But if it were not and such, like it was not a practice where we would proactively say, we are going to interview at level 5. It was sort of more left for the candidate to ask, more left for the candidate to figure that out later, so to speak. So generally speaking, like we advise people to ask, like from the candidate side, we advise people to ask, hey, what level am I being considered for? Right? Is that sort of right? What you've seen as well, and I'm sure you have interviewed elsewhere as well, not just Facebook.
Generally the level is not given like in a concrete terms, right? They might give you a kind of an approximate range, like the recruiter might tell you, oh, this might be IC4 or IC5, but it is beyond a certain point, right? They kind of have to know before and let the candidate know, because the interview slightly changes from IC6 onwards, even the phone screen. But yeah, from IC3 to IC5, right? They do give you like a very vague idea, but they'll never give you the exact level you're being considered for, most likely.
Wonderful. Doris, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Very, very welcome as well, Doris. Like, would you mind introducing yourself a little bit?
Of course. Of course. Hi, everyone. I'm a recruiting manager currently at Netflix. Pretty new, 8 months in. Prior to that, I was at Facebook for about 7 years, and I did a short stint at Google prior to that. So happy to be here and answer any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Doris. Let's ask you the same question which we were just discussing. Right? The leveling of a candidate, like and sort of in our minds, it is sort of more engineering type of candidate. When somebody applies, right, how is leveling decided for a candidate? Like it is clear to me that you can't really pick a level. You can't, like, as a candidate, you can't just say, hey, I want to be an L6. And there's a process behind it.
Wouldn't that be great?
I know.
Wouldn't it be great if you could? And actually, I think that there is some semblance of collaboration in the first recruiting screen. And so what I mean by that is usually when a role opens, the hiring manager and the recruiting partner work together to determine what scope of role it is and how it matches to maybe that company's level. And so the scope of role is actually predetermined before candidates are being met. Now, through the process of candidates getting met, that's when either the matching happens. And so if you find someone who maybe, so for example, if a role is open at the 5 to 6 level, there is a difference. 6 might mean a lot of strategy work, long-term planning. 5 might mean subject matter expert, go deep in your space, but maybe you're not working as cross-functionally or strategically as level 6 is. Or you're not working at a global scale, working on products that are just have a big runway. So from that perspective, the hiring partner and the recruiter will go, okay, this candidate, based on what we know of this person, we think that they'll probably lean into a level 5 for these reasons. It kind of starts with the years of experience, but that being said, it's not a determining factor. It's just more years of experience generally correlates to how experienced someone is, but it's definitely not a defining factor. So that's what I'll say with level is it's scoped out at the beginning of the search. You get on the phone with a recruiter. The recruiter assesses your skill level. And depending on the examples that you provide, that person will make the assessment, which level will I suggest this candidate to go into? And then as the interviews keep on going, the company and the team and hiring manager gets more signal as to where this person might be successful. The interesting part is when someone is cuspy, right? That's not, I don't even think that's like a word per se.
Right.
But I'm going to
On
make
the
that up.
fence, yeah.
Yes, on the fence. So this is where I think the collaboration and the owning your own career and advocating for yourself comes in, because a hiring manager might lean and say, hey, I know for certain this person will be successful at level 5. They might come in and they hit all their multipliers and feel really good about themselves because they're almost quote unquote top of or just top of 5. But I could also bring this person at 6, but it's a little bit of a greater risk. What if they don't meet expectations right away? What if they become demoralized because they're meeting most expectations? And so that all those things kind of come into play where it's like, do I bring them at 5 and kind of promote them? Or do I just kind of lean into the next level and then they might stay at that level for a while, but then get demotivated if they're not promoted quickly? So I think as a candidate, you may just, if you feel like you're on the cusp, and just have that frank conversation with the recruiting team, and then just be open about what your expectations are and the risks that you want to lean into.
Yep, fascinating. Thank you for this choice of words. I realize maybe on the fence is probably not the right one, but cuspy is actually more appropriate than on the fence for sure. Interesting, very interesting, Rohit. And so interesting thing about leveling, right? So and Anthony pointed out also something else that we have seen as well, where you come from, right, also weighs in a fair bit in the leveling, right? Sometimes you come from a peer company, right, and that weighs in quite a bit. If you're L5 at a peer company, then sort of your thinking starts at L5 for the current company, right? And maybe the candidate negotiates a higher level in the process, but generally sort of where you come from, the type of company you come from also matters, and where what level you are at that company also matters, right? Is that right?
So this is a tricky one, because I think this is where the candidate can probably take more time to educate not just the recruiter but the hiring manager. And what I mean by that is spend time educating on the company that you're at now, if it is not a brand name or not a known name. So when we say Google, Facebook, Apple, you think of scale, you think large projects at scale, but that doesn't necessarily mean a smaller startup doesn't have scale. If a company has grown 75% year over year in the last 3 years, that is a version of scale. So I think for that, it's you're right, Soham, to say that people do make snap judgments based on the type of company that you are coming from, and from the companies that they do understand. So if the recruiter knows how Google's framework and leveling system works really well, or how it maps to Microsoft, et cetera, then it's easy to go, okay, we're giving someone a bump if we bring them in at this level, or hey, they've been lateral, or hey, they've actually been at this level at their company for the last 2 years, so we should lean into the higher level, right? So all these snap judgments that we're making, but I think that's where, from a candidate perspective, if you actually take the time to educate your hiring manager, your future hiring manager, and the recruiter and give the appropriate examples to demonstrate scale or how global something is or the impact of the project that you're on, I think that's where you can advocate a strong level. But I will say, unfortunately, people move really fast these days, and do recruiters and hiring managers take a deep look at the companies that people are coming from to really understand what has happened within that company during the time that you've been employed there? No. So I would say if there's something that you could control, would be that. And whether that's in a written format or a conversation, I always say it's written format is better.
Fascinating. Written format is better to advocate for yourself and like explain where you're coming from, what type of projects you've handled, and such. And I'm guessing it is not just the first conversation. That has to be done through the process. Like there's obviously the recruiter conversation, but also somewhere down the line the hiring manager conversation. Also, one should take the time to explain where you're coming from.
Yes, and it's very common for a hiring manager to hop on the phone with candidates kind of as they're nearing the final stages to understand the scope. Actually, the biggest question that people generally always ask me is say, oh, I don't want to rub the manager the wrong way and advocate for a higher level. I trust the manager, or, or maybe they feel uncertain about the offer that they're being given, and so they just turn it down, and then the leveling conversation happens, right? But by then it's kind of like, could we have gotten here first? So my recommendation is that before you get to final rounds, in final rounds, if you're invited to final rounds, that you probably have a pretty good chance at securing this role. Usually there's 2 to 3 candidates per role, right? But sometimes there's only one. So if you're invited to second and final rounds, that's where it's appropriate to have that conversation of, can I understand this level? What is the scope? What is the trajectory? And then if you feel like you can actually do more, then lean into that and just ask, to say, is there a possibility that I can be brought in at a higher level and a higher scope? Because I'm confident I can hit the ground running. And then in that conversation, you might just table set and get more context and information and feel good about the level that they're providing you, even if they don't up level you.
And so one peculiar problem I had, and I'm sure Anthony and Doris, you've had that as well, that my panel, the panel that I would, as a hiring manager, when I would set the panel, I would keep the level in mind when I'm setting the panel, right? And so if the level is higher than what I was thinking, or level is much lower than what I was thinking, then the panel also needs to change, right? And so some of this stuff needs to happen, like you said, probably before the final rounds, right? Otherwise you may not be interviewed by the right people. Does that happen?
It does, especially when you talk about level 6 to 7, or right, director, between kind of a director scope and manager, even if the titles are the same. Because I know at Facebook 6 and 7 titles are the same, but actually there's a clear difference between 6 and 7. So I also want to mention that if this is public information, but companies generally map leveling guidelines to Radford levels. And so if you are keen on exploring that a little bit more, you could kind of Google that and take a look at the Radford levels, and that's generally what companies will map to.
Radford, the company that does all the surveys and compensations and such, right? That they have their levels.
Yeah, they have a framework for IC track and manager track, and it's very cute. There's an analogy on how to tie a rope. Are you a teacher of tying ropes, or are you just kind of learning what a rope is, right? And then it kind of walks you through all levels. So I think it's interesting.
Very interesting. No, I had not seen that before. I will absolutely explore that. And thank you for that, Doris. The folks, it's 7:23. Let me refresh the room a little bit, real quick again. We are talking about leveling today, right? So leveling, especially at well-known companies, and when we are talking largely, we have software engineering in mind, but it applies practically everywhere. And again, my name is Soham. I happen to run Interview Kickstart with Steph and Prasid and Ryan, and so some of these people are in and out today. We have Anthony up here. Anthony is at Facebook. He's leading teams in ML ads infrastructure, and we have Doris with us as well, who manages part of recruiting at Netflix, and she has been at other tier 1 companies before. We usually meet Thursday evening, and we talk about just interesting things in and around careers. Feel free to follow the club. There is a small green house button at the top. If you click on that, you can follow the club. You can get all the notifications as and when we schedule the events. Feel free to follow us as speakers. That will also give you notifications as well. Let's see, and at Interview Kickstart, we do courses for technical interview prep for engineers, and we are coming up with some new courses as well, like ML interview prep and engineering management interview prep and all that as well. And generally, we do algorithms, systems design, and soft skills. Okay, awesome. Let's continue. This is a very interesting, very interesting topic. So now. So and again, like just to sort of almost close the topic of sort of choosing a level, like once you are slotted into a level in the interview process, right, there's really no way to change it midway, is there? Like you can't just wake up and say, oops, no, I had to be interviewed at a bigger level or a higher level or a lower level. Right? So once it starts, and then sort of any changes only happen towards the end. Is that right, Anthony, Doris?
I would say it's not fixed in stone, right? Like, let's say you're kind of applying for an IC5. Of course, let's say you did very well in the interviews, right? And for leveling, the most important interviews are behavior and system design. There's very clear-cut definitions on what needs to be done, right? It's very easy to level somebody in those interviews. But let's say you cleared all the IC5 guidelines, right? But somehow you felt, oh, I deserve IC6. You can go back to the recruiter and say, can you measure me for IC6 also, right? So they might throw in additional interviews, but it's very rare, right? Somebody who has cleared IC5, maybe the interviewer would have said, this guy is showing IC6 signals, so that they would come and proactively ask you to do maybe one more interview. But it's kind of very clear cut, I would say, because in a design, right, you do something like an IC5, they're not going to come and accept you as an IC6. But if you did really well at an IC6 level in the design and behavior, of course, they would be open to giving you one more interview to go to IC6, and they may not even give you an extra interview that might be sufficient to up-level you.
Makes sense. Doris, what has been your experience in that?
So it depends on what company and whether the company is a boot camp system or not. So are you interviewing for a pipeline and then you get matched later, in which case it is easy, as Anthony was saying, to kind of tack on an additional interview to figure out what scope and level. But if you're maybe interviewing for a company that doesn't have a boot camp and it's rec-based, and that's actually how Netflix interviews right now, then there is a sense of fluctuation. Because imagine if a team is hiring 3 people at one time and the interview process starts for all 3 open heads. One comes in fairly, quote unquote, early on in their experience, so they're early 5. The next hire, we might say, okay, let's try to go for like a higher range or a higher scope. Then we'll probably have flexibility there. But also scopes do change in terms of scope and size too, and they can go down depending on how experienced folks who came in prior kind of came in. So when you think of just team build, team design, org health, not everyone can be closer to the principal engineer. You kind of need a variation of types of folks. So I think throughout the interview process, I would just double check to make sure that things haven't changed. But generally speaking, is if it's multiple hires, yes, that can happen. If it's one hire and the manager is really certain that they know what they want, then that's where you might see things stick through. I do see a lot of the times too, and I'd love, Anthony, your perspective here on someone might be really experienced and might might be a solid 6, but then the scope of your role probably is like a high 5. Do you end up passing on that person, or leaning into hiring maybe someone who's slightly out of scope, who has a risk and potentially get bored in role?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and I kind of want to add about on what Doris said about down leveling, right? You might go in for an IC5 interview too, and you might think you're good enough for IC6, right? But maybe the behavior and design thought you actually did only IC4. You're clearly not IC5. So they would down level you there too, right? Then what you say doesn't matter, that whether you think you're IC6. But yeah, and according to Doris' example too, right? If the person applied for an IC6, there is a good chance he would get down leveled 1 level. But I haven't seen down leveling to 2 levels down, right? If it was 2 levels down, they'd probably reject him. But it's totally okay to down level them 1 level down and give an offer if they didn't meet the standard for IC6.
Interesting. So here is a hard one, right? And I've seen fairly subjective decisions being made in this one, where we take a candidate through the process and we realize that and they're not at the level that we hoped they would be. Now at that point, right, like do we reject or do we down level? Now I have not seen this governed by any sort of policy. I've seen this done very case by case basis. I've had people in the entire spectrum, like being offered the level below, them taking it, not taking it. I've also seen people not offered the level below as well. Like how do you think those decisions happen on this?
Right. So that depends on your overall interviews too, right? There is, of course, coding rounds, behavior, and system design. Let's say he knocked the coding rounds out of the park, right? Got 5 out of 5 for an IC6, and somehow his behavior was borderline and design was borderline. So they might try to throw in an extra design to get him to the right level, make a do-over interview. But in one of the interviews, right, if it was really clear that he's not IC6, maybe in behavior because the scope is too small, then they would just down level him. I haven't seen them reject a candidate outright because he still passes IC5, right? Maybe he showed all the IC5 signals in design and behavior, then of course you get down leveled. But if you apply for IC6 and you can show only up to IC4, yeah, then you're not going to get even any offer. Yeah, so that's an approximate guideline.
For me, when I always laugh when people say interviewing is subjective, because you're so right. It really is. And I know all the companies are trying to figure out how to make it as objective of a process as possible. But the reality is that there's limited data points, right? When that's what I'm talking about, this beyond the technical side. For when I've seen hiring partners lean into maybe, oh, I met this person, actually super likable. That's the subjective part. I'm willing to coach and I'm willing to train. I'm willing to grow and invest in these in this person. That's when I see the hiring manager step away from what they were originally intending to hire. So with that, I think if I were a candidate, I would probably just ask the recruiter in the first call too, is, can you really walk me through what is a preferred and a must-have? And then does the hiring have capability to train and coach? Because even if they are a great want to train and coach, but if they have limited bandwidth and time, then they're going to lean into hiring someone who has the experience, can hit the ground running. So I think that's an important to understand probably in your first call with the recruiter.
Yeah, no, absolutely right. Interviewing is quite subjective, I think, and like I've said elsewhere as well, I think it's a date more than it's a test. It's like this round of speed dates with interviewers and hence with the company, and that's a hill I think I'm pretty sure I'm going to die on. It's not a test. Many people think it's a test, and there's like a series of things that you can do and just to crack it, like you can crack SATs and GREs, but it's not the case. Excellent. Very, very interesting conversation. And well, we have Nick on stage. Nick, welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Would you mind introducing yourself to the audience a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I see some familiar faces in the crowd. See some familiar faces on the panel as well. You guys must have been having an awesome conversation so far.
Yes, until you came in. But
And until I came in, it's hard
No,
to
no.
follow Doris, man. You're introing me
Yeah.
after such a great, a great
I'm Nick,
response.
long time.
I know. How you doing? I'm Nick Camilleri. I head up career development here at Interview Kickstart, or career coaching, more specifically. I've been here for about 4.5 years, and in that time, I got to work very closely with Soham and Steph, as well as Doris, in building our career skills team. So did a lot of hiring there, but yeah, that's a little bit about me. Excited to be here tonight.
Fascinating. Thank you, Nick. Let's see. Let's touch upon compensation real quick, and then we'll take audience questions as well. Folks, again, my name is Soham, and we are talking about leveling. Yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and such. In just a few minutes, we'll bring the people with questions up, and we'll have interesting discussions. So, compensation. Right? The whole point of leveling really seems to be compensation. Like, obviously, some sort of a career satisfaction certainly there. But why even bother about thinking about levels, right? And it's really compensation. What drives the compensation more than anything else is really the level, is my understanding. And each level has a band. And again, some subjectivity comes in there as well. And sort of where do we start this person at? What part of the band? Right? What part on the left? What part on the right of the band? And that is also not something one can influence, right? Doris, Anthony, Nick, like once the level is decided, it's decided. And then what can one do to influence the part of the band that you are at within a given level? Is there something that one can do?
Yeah, within a particular level, right? I believe interview performance is one of the biggest things you do, because there are various confidence levels, right? Even if you pass, there's like a low confidence pass, medium, high, and super high. So that does a lot. And I would say the more important thing is your negotiation skills, and you recommend, right? Whether you have competing offers from other tier one companies, that actually makes a big difference too, in how much which band your pay goes into. At a certain point, your interview performance gets thrown out if you have a competing offer from another company like Google, and then they try to match you close to that. It depends on the company, of course, but that has a big influence too. Unless you did badly in the interviews, like a low confidence pass, you have negotiation advantage if you have other offers.
Oh, compensation.
I know, isn't it?
This is so fun. Okay, I'm gonna put away my recruiter hat and give you all the secrets. Just kidding. So I think the biggest thing is that companies want to make sure that you are happy with your compensation. That's number one. And I think a lot of people forget that. It's I don't think most companies are out there, unless they're on a really tight budget, to nickel and dime people. And they want people to be happy about what they're getting paid so they could focus on their work. And so when you're working with a recruiter, I think a lot of candidates will come in on the defensive and not share information and whatnot. But actually, that will really hurt you, because the data that you provide with competing offers will inform what your personal top of market is, which is what is your worth. And not everyone can get an offer from XYZ companies, but here you are, and you have these competing offers. So maybe we should lean into that. And if other companies are willing to pay you that, then we should as well. So that's how I think the market will drive, right? I actually, going on slight tangent, but think it's kind of funny, when accounting was the biggest thing, and to be a CPA was just the hot thing to do. And this was before software development came around, right? CPAs got paid an exorbitant amount of money. And then Sarbanes-Oxley came out, and the rules and regulations, you just really needed to know what that was. And so people who knew SOX were paid so much money. And so now the demand has gone down because everyone's trained up and it's part of the education system. And so accountants are not as paid high. So I think about it in terms of software development, and the offers and the competition will continue to drive the market up. And so the more that you can provide your recruiter with that data, the more they're able to tell a story, come back to the compensation team and negotiate on your behalf as they speak about your market. Now, there is a new law out there saying recruiters should not ask current compensation to protect people, because what if you come from nonprofit and you're not paid that much, or from government, right? And so, yeah, you probably are paid, or even animation. I think about the studio world and Disney's and Pixar's, and now that, those folks who are coming from lower paid industries, will it hurt them giving their current comp to the next company? And so I will say is, although legally recruiters can't ask you what your current comp is, you can always offer it to them, but also help them and actually like ask the questions and understand what the tech rates are. So I guess to my point is, in a nutshell, if you are negotiating with a big company, they have standards, they have a compensation team, they care about pay equity, they're not going to pay you less than the other person coming in. So there is a minimum. But if you have higher competing offers, and that's where you can stretch out your compensation. Also, if you're walking away from something, then they'll bake it into your comp. If you are negotiating with the smaller startup who might not have a compensation team, that's when you have to be really careful, because the data point that they will go off of is your current comp if you do share that. So it just depends on what position you're in. And then the last thing I'll say with compensation is, you always should map out your trajectory over the course of 4 to 6 years. Usually recruiters will map it out for you 4 years. They might just give you what the first year annual is, but all companies have different packages around equity refreshers, individual and company multipliers. And so you can earn in excess. And so I just think it's really important to understand the math and what that looks like between 4 to 6 years, because certain companies will have different formulas. And so your earnings might look different if the multipliers are different.
Wonderful. So Nick, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and just firstly, I think everything Anthony and Doris was saying is spot on.
Yeah.
Two things that I want to add to it. The first is that when you're going for similar to what Doris was saying, the company wants you to accept the offer, right? So when you're going into an interview process, you should really get clear on two numbers, right? One, what is the market value, right? What does that actually look like at those companies? And there's lots of good resources out there for this. You could look at sites like levels.fyi, LinkedIn salaries, even just Googling salaries in different locations for different roles, for different levels. So get clear on what the actual range looks like, right? So that at the beginning of the process, you can set fair expectations, okay? And be proactive with it. Let the recruiter know that, like, hey, this is what I'm seeing, okay? The second thing here is that as you go through that process, really think about what's important to you in terms, like Doris is saying, you're trying to project out what your potential earnings might be, and start to think about, what are you trying to accomplish financially in the next few years, right? And how much money do you actually need as that bare minimum that, like, I cannot accept under this, right? And that way you and the recruiter can come to a fair agreement in the end, right? Where it's a win-win. You're still going to be able to live comfortably, be able to get what you're looking for financially, but it also will be, fair with the team as well. And then the second thing I wanted to add in there is to remember that long-term earnings is a big piece of this too. And even though you may be at one level or another level, the work you're doing itself is going to pay dividends. Right? Either if you're going to be in a team that has high visibility at this company, right? There's going to be a lot more opportunities for growth, right? If you're working on really niche but important projects, that's going to help you grow not only at that company, but any other company that is in a similar space. So try to keep those things in mind as you're going through. That level isn't everything, right? But having clear expectations and understanding the value of your work and what that's going to mean for the rest of your career and in the years to come, that should come into your decision-making process as well.
Makes sense. So if I summarize it, do your research about the comp, and a few things that you can do potentially to influence it is, one, your interview performance. If it is solid, then there is a very good chance that you will get a better offer. If you have competing offers, is really one of the biggest ones that you can do. Biggest thing you can do to influence the comp at a given level. Once the level is decided, right? That's what you can do. And also where you work, which team you work, matters quite a bit as well. A company wants to invest in a certain area and you happen to have some of the skills in that area, then they will go a little bit further to have you as well. Awesome. Sounds good. Folks, let's see. I'm going to bring somebody up for questions. Let's... and until they come. Oh yeah, Vasant is here. Hi Vasant, did you have a question?
Oh, hi, yeah. So I just wanted to make a small observation to what you guys had summed up. Like it was like a very interesting conversation. I've also seen some candidates getting leveled up by going for like additional rounds of interviews. So potentially like you're hired at a specific level, but then like after the interview you kind of realize your level is kind of not the right level, then there is always a possibility that you can ask for a level up, and you might be having further rounds of interviews, but that has worked out in some of the candidates I've seen.
That's an interesting one. Is that possible, Anthony? Have you seen that?
Yes, it is possible, but again, it's purely based on your interview performance, right? And I would focus on system design and behavior. And in a way, the behavior interviewer actually owns the loop in a way, so he can come up with recommendation and judgments. So let's say your system design was levels, you're applying for level 5, right? And the system design said, oh, this was a level 6 performance. But the behavior guy says, oh yeah, this is definitely level 5, right? There's no way he's going for level 6. So there is some priority of interviewers too. But if both of them say, oh yeah, this was borderline level 6, right? But let's give him one more interview and try for level 6. Yeah, so they would come up proactively. I would say the interview performance plays a big part in that. Yeah.
Yep, second. And usually you actually do see that correlation, because the more and more you meet the teams and companies, the more data points that company has about you. And so then you're just able to share more examples that maybe will have them lean into the confidence that you're could come in at a higher level. So the interview performance in such a short amount of time, and knowing which examples to share that's relative to the scope of role that you want, I think is really key.
Makes sense. Vasant, were you saying that after the interview decision was made, a candidate, you have seen candidates come back and say, no, I am this other higher level, do more interviews?
Right. So I've seen candidates approaching the interview loop again to confirm, like if they were looking for like a level 6 position, and so if additional rounds of interviews are possible. And again, like based on your interview performance, if you are like if you really aced the level 5 interview, there's a possibility that you might be borderline, and having a couple of rounds of system design again could potentially get you to level 6. But that's something good to ask if you feel confident in performing. But most of the big techs will also try to undersell a level, because they do not want you to like kind of join in a specific level which you're not prepared for. So there's like a lot of variables at play there, right? So it's your personal comfort level in operating at that level. And also another thing I've seen is the time it takes for you to grow from level 5 to level 6, for example, in a big tech is going to be much longer than you going in at level 6, right? So it's always good to see what your comfort level is, and if you really have that kind of experience in designing like big scale systems, then it's worth a shot to definitely ask.
Interesting point, very interesting point. So what you are saying is that maybe potentially it's possible that the entire hiring loop did not have this kind of debate whether you should be up leveled or not. And so maybe you could, after the interview decision is handed, like yes, in this case, you could potentially go back and ask, hey, you know what, you guys have sought me L5, but I think I'm L6. And so maybe when the interview loop could, or the hiring committee could reconsider and say, yeah, okay, fine, let's give them a couple more interviews. And I think if they are not proactive about it, you're saying that maybe you can suggest as a candidate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it has worked in a few candidates I've seen. So
Yeah. And I think, I would add and say, don't ignore the behavioral loop, right? But because that has a outsized view of leveling too. Because in behavior, it's very clear cut, right? For a trained interviewer, it's very easy for them to say whether you're IC5 or IC6. They'll never confuse the two. The decisions are pretty clear cut. And system design, of course, maybe it's kind of subjective in system design. You can be borderline IC5, IC6, but I think behavior, definitely they're able to tell pretty clearly.
That is quite fascinating. Wonderful. Thank you, Vasant. Thank you, Anthony. Appreciate that insight. I'm sure this was useful to many people in the audience. Yes, and Jesu, did you have a question, comment?
Yeah. So I have a question about the, when we are getting the offer, usually the recruiter says that within 2 days you have to respond. If not, it will be expired. How much likely that if we are unable to respond, how much likely it will be really expired, or what are the ways to get it back?
Yeah, Jesu, it's slightly out of scope for today, but generally speaking, in many cases it is not. In many cases it is FOMO. It's one of the tactics to get you to answer quickly. In some cases it is true though. It's relatively rare. But we'll do another session on this. You can also reach out to Nick separately. We're happy to answer that too. To do the strategies, especially if you are in that process, in that mindset at the moment, right? And then as you know, in all IK alums, we help them with offer negotiations, even if they are not in the program anymore and such. And so, yeah.
Okay.
Awesome. Thank you, Jesu. Appreciate that. Abhishek, did you have a question as well?
Hi. Yeah. Great discussion. So I'm up for promotion in my current employer. But that won't kick in until the end of next month. But I'm also simultaneously interviewing with other companies. So is it okay to use that futuristic title as leverage for potential employers and get level based on that? Or should I wait for it to kick in before I can, advocate for something?
I think so. So I think that's okay to be transparent about. But what I would also add in information there, just to kind of secure your story, is the last time I was promoted was 2 years ago at this level, or I was brought into the company at this level. Here I am 2 years later. I'm up for promotion coming up. These are the conversations I'm having with my management team. I feel pretty confident about it. So if you provide that context, I think it will solidify your story and help the company kind of think about that differently. But it absolutely will, because it is a signal as to, hey, look, if a company is about to promote this person and they're on that track, then that's a good data point as a signal for your scope and how it has increased over the last X number of years.
Okay, thanks. Actually, my manager did tell me that I got from it's approved, but the official conferring of the title won't kick in until next month because of the way the focal cycle happens.
Yeah.
So,
even better. So you can say you got promoted. It's just it will go into effect X date. So
okay, all right, thanks.
And can I
Awesome.
really quick?
Yeah.
Also, oftentimes promotions will have sort of the rubric to say you already have to contribute in such and such ways for so long at the next level in order to get there. And so to Doris's point, yes, be able to say like these are the conversations I'm having, and also this is the work that I've already done that's at that level. Especially if you're potentially going to a slightly higher level at the new company, being able to show them that like, no, this, yes, I don't have that title yet, but I've been doing this work for a long time can also help as well.
Nick, that's spot on. I think the verbiage is promotions at X company are, the philosophy is lagging versus leading. You should demonstrate that you can operate consistently at the next level for X amount of time. So that's great.
Yeah, compensation, promotions, I think we can do like hours and hours long sessions on this separately. Awesome, folks. Wonderful questions, wonderful insights, everybody. That's Dhruv, before I come to you, just one other thought in my head. The time it takes, which I think Vasant alluded to, the time it takes to go from one level to the other, that also is an interesting factor once you are in, and also when you're trying to get in. Right? And in my understanding, that time elongates with every level. Right? So 3 to 4 x, 4 to 5 is slightly x plus delta, 5 to 6 is more, and then 6 to 7 is more, and such. And then there's also a concept of a terminal level. Right? You don't have to be promoted to the next level if you don't want to be. You don't have to be performing at the next level necessarily. My sense is it kicks in after a certain time. L3 being the entry level bachelor's degree, and then once you're at L4 or L5 and you don't want to be promoted, right, there are companies who won't bother you, and you can just be meeting expectations and just getting raises which are commensurate to inflation, and refreshers and such. Is that real as well, Doris, Anthony?
Yes, and the requirements are so much more at the lower levels, right? Especially in companies like at Facebook. Let's see, you're at IC3 and IC4, right? You have this kind of deadline, which could be anywhere from 1 to 1.5 years, where you're supposed to get promoted. Otherwise, you're probably going to get a negative rating and maybe fired too. It kind of elongates from IC4 to IC5. Maybe it's 2 to 3 years, but IC5 is a terminal level. There are guys who are 55 years old who are IC5 too, so they're fine with that. But yeah, at the junior levels, it matters a lot more when you're out of school.
Right, up or out is junior levels, and you have to get from L3
Yep.
to L4, L4 to L5. Yeah, and then they'll stop bothering you. Right? Like
Correct.
Yeah, just a small thing to add, like what I've seen is like exceeding at like your L5 level doesn't mean like you're necessarily meeting all the expectations of L6, because at least in companies like Facebook, the prerequisites for each of the levels are different. Like your job duties and what you're expected to do kind of differs between levels. So your career progression doesn't necessarily mean like you need to have exceeds or redefines to get like to the next level. It could be you can be meeting all the expectations of L5, but then you're already working in the role of an L6, or maybe like you're exceeding the role in L5 and you land up in L6, but you're not even meeting the expectations there.
Fascinating. And I suppose, Doris, Netflix gets around this very interestingly, doesn't it? Like everybody's a senior software engineer there.
Yes, title wise. But of course, I mean, of course, the compensation varies, right? Because experience varies. So while there aren't necessarily levels per se, so the nice thing about not having a system of levels is that you can be, if you kind of look at it and compare it with another company that does have levels, people necessarily don't need to get promoted to have that big of an increase, right? So you can actually be in between levels in theory, even though there are no levels. So, I'll just give you an example of if a level is at 250, the next level is at 300, people could sit at the 275K mark. So it's that like, you don't need to go all the way to kind of the next scope per se. You can kind of be in between, which is the nice part.
Makes sense. Yeah, I know of a friend who is at who's considered at level 7.5.
That's great.
Yeah, feels like the platform 9 3/4. But
yeah,
it's fascinating. Yeah, sorry.
So there's one more thing about levels that I think is interesting. When managers are promoting from within, the conversation is Is this a spike in performance and a spike in scope of role, or is it sustainable? Meaning, will I have this level of work for someone in the long term? If so, then let's talk about next level. If it's not, and it's just a big push for one half, then I think that's where people can feel like, oh, I feel like I'm doing the work of the level 6, but why won't they promote me? And it could be, is there enough room for that scope? So you see this more at traditional at larger companies where there's a lot of folks and not a lot of room. And so I think that's, if you are trying to grow your career in the fastest way, just work for a scaling company.
Yes, excellent point, Doris. Work for a scaling company. If the company is not growing, there is little chance that you would grow. Though I suppose that applies a little bit more to managers than to ICs. ICs theoretically could be just growing within their roles if the projects are like growing and scale. But if that's happening, even the number of people will grow. So, but yes, exactly, spot on advice. Try and work for a company that is growing. And if you saw the financial results, the quarterly results, the earnings reports for the FANG companies, you know what I mean. Like, they have broken all records this quarter in, I think, Q1. Then they are going to just hire for the next year or two, probably a lot more. And also many other growing companies are now meeting or beating the offers at FANG companies as well. So seek those out. That's the advice. Awesome. Roop, did you have a question? Roop, you are on mute if you're speaking.
Oh, yeah. Okay, now I could unmute. Sorry for that delay. Yes, I do have a question. So I have a PhD, but have been working as a developer/manager for quite some time, 21-year total experience after PhD. And I'm at level 4 in my company, and they have only level 5 levels. And the reason I'm not at level 5 is because there are other people who are even more senior. They need to be at level 5. So given that kind of situation, if I go to a FANG company, what would they be thinking about my level?
So are you speaking a little bit about internal compression, meaning because you have less years of experience than the folks who are at level 5, your company is kind of keeping you at level 4, even though your scope and work might be similar?
Yes.
Okay. So when you're interviewing for another company, I think that's internal compression is a real thing. It's kind of hard to solve for because it's all about fairness. And you know what the question people always have is, what if everyone ran around, talked to each other, and shared what each was making? And you know, people usually match level to years of experience. That's traditionally how it's always been done. But I think as we're seeing more and more tech, it's all about impact. So I think when you're interviewing elsewhere, you may just want to talk about your impact and how it compares with your colleagues who maybe are at that higher level. I don't think you need to necessarily share, oh, I'm a 4 out of 5 per se, but you can say I'm, you know, in one of the highest levels of the company. So that just kind of gives a little bit perspective. But yeah, so that's my advice. Is just speak to the scope.
So will the recruiter then decide based on that what level to place or me for the interview?
Based on what you share in terms of your scope, then they will kind of map it out to the current company's level that they're working at, and see if it goes hand in hand. Because while you might be one of the top 2 highest levels at your company, if it's not the same scope, right? Like it might not match apples to apples with the top 2 levels of another company. So I think it just depends on how you describe it and how the recruiter matches it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Depends on how you describe it. This is where choice of words, communication skills, behavioral skills come very handy. Many people in engineering tend to ignore it, but those are the real money skills. Actually, it's not algorithms. Okay, excellent. Excellent, Doris. Thanks, Roop, as well.
Thank you.
Chris, did you have a question, comment?
Yes. Thank you guys so much for putting up this room and for having this conversation, for bringing me on stage. I joined a little late, so I don't know if this was explicitly covered, but it seems to be a bit of a unique situation to me. I have a couple of offers in hand from, let's say, like some FANG-esque or FANG companies, and one of them was a little bit lower than I was expecting, and I wanted to use like leveling as a basis for negotiations. And so I asked about level, but I was told that, you know, it's like a proprietary topic that's not really like discussed with people like, you know, outside the company or before, you know, an offer is accepted. Should I just like disregard leveling when it comes to trying to negotiate this particular offer upwards and just, you know, talk about the amounts of the competing offer? Or should I try to dig in and find out like where I'm being placed or how I'm being evaluated as?
I think you should lead. Everyone else should weigh in too, but I think you should lead with your competing offers and start there. And, you know, oh gosh, this is the big debate that I even have with people all the time, is whether or not it's right or wrong to share levels. Because the problem is, once you come in and then you find out what your level is, if you are unhappy with the scope, then that's a problem for the company anyway. So maybe what I would do is talk to them about, here are my competing offers. I'm not exactly thrilled with this offer, which is totally okay, because you should be happy with your offer coming in, right? Or else you'll be a disgruntled employee from day one. So why would they want that either? But the second piece is, I think you need to understand, if they can't share a level, which you're right, some companies cannot, can they walk you through the scope of the role? And then what would the scope of the role at the next level be? They don't have to share the numbers with you, but conceptually they should be able to walk you through what is required in the role and what's expected of you and your performance coming in. So I think from there, you could do your research on the different Radford levels and kind of see how Radford explains, maps out their levels. And I think that will help you do that research first, because I think it'll help arm your conversation with the recruiter to really understand the difference.
And Chris, just a quick follow-up question to clarify. So is the question to say, let's say I have company A, company B, right? Is it to say that, you know, to get company A to go higher, I want to share my level from company B because I think that'll serve as leverage? Is this the question?
I guess that's that could be a part of it. More so, what I was thinking mainly was like, I don't know why this level or this compensation is a little bit lower, and maybe I can begin to start understanding why it is by understanding, you know, how they think of me or where I've been placed, like what my level is. But you know, I guess it could be looked at the other way around too, like you just mentioned it.
Mm-hmm. So kind of just say, okay, I want to get a better sense of why my offer is what it is at this company, and is it possible to get them to go higher than they currently are if another offer is a higher or at a higher level? Is that a better understanding?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, I totally agree with Doris in terms of like understanding the scope of both roles, right? And to the point she was making earlier from the previous question as well, like levels aren't created equal at each company. So even if you say, well, at this company I'm going to be a senior software engineer, and at this one I'm going to be staff or whatever, that doesn't really matter as much as like what are you actually going to be contributing at that level in that role at that company, right? So from that perspective, I don't think the level matters as much, but what I would do, right, is try to get a sense of basically what are your leverage points. And this is something for anyone who isn't with IK. This is something we teach in our offer negotiation classes as well. I would try to get a sense of like what are the different levers you can pull. So you can create some FOMO potentially with a company that has a higher offer by saying that, let's say company A has a higher offer, but company B has a bigger scope, right? You can tell company A that, well, I really like the work I'd be doing over here at company B, right? And see if that can sort of entice them to make a more competitive offer. Then on the flip side, you can go to company B, which has the higher scope, right? And let them know, well, company A has higher value to the offer financially, right? So you can pull both levers, but the level itself, I don't see as very persuasive typically.
Gotcha. Thank you. And then kind of a bit of a follow-up question. I guess anyone can answer it, but if I don't like go in and talk about like level outright, but I do lead with I suppose like compensation and as like the primary negotiation tactic. Putting that aside, I think like I heard a little bit earlier is that where you are, or I don't want to call it level, but like maybe like scope of responsibilities can affect future jobs down the line when moving to different companies later. And so I'm wondering how I could go about setting myself up now to have like, the greatest, not just compensation, but like responsibilities and scope of responsibilities for future jobs without necessarily discussing or explicitly discussing levels. I don't know if that question like makes sense, but I realize like, levels are kind of proprietary, but at the same time, they do kind of exist. And I want to start as high as I can here so I can continue, progressing forward.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's also important to ask, like, can you describe the scope at the level below? Because then you'll really get a sense of, okay, where am I coming in? Am I coming in, 3, 4, 5? How does it match? Am I expected to be the subject matter expert? And then is there room for me to grow? So, level and scope actually go hand in hand. So you're just essentially having them describe the level to you. And that is a really fair question. And if they don't, I would continue pushing, and I would be very skeptical of accepting. To someone's question earlier on the whole strong arming to just accept this offer, it's going to expire. It's a tactic, but in reality is that unless they have a backup candidate, or unless they, unless they have, people waiting in a long line, and people will wait for the people that they want. And so I just, I'll give that tidbit, but it sounds like you have a lot of exploration to do and a frank conversation to understand what the job entails and what the growth trajectory is, and room for that. And people will be honest with you, right? Like, they don't want to hire someone and have someone leave in a year. So if there isn't growth and isn't scope, they'll be really clear with you about that. But I would encourage you to like not accept the offer until you feel good about it and have more conversations directly with the hiring manager.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Doris. Thanks, everyone else. Awesome. Sudhir, I just learned you have hopped in. Welcome. Would you mind introducing yourself quickly? You are on mute if you're speaking, Sudhir.
Hey, hi, Som. Hi, guys. My name is Sudhir. I work as a senior manager at Amazon. Actually, I'm based out of Bangalore. I actually deal with in the education space. We do, rentals. We do textbook rentals, e-textbook rentals, and more recently, we're getting a little bit more into the ed tech space. Just fun fact: I was a part of Interview Kickstart 4 years back. So I am an alumni, and I have actually benefited from this program. So 4 years back, I joined Audible as an L6 SD, and then transitioned over to India as a manager, and recently got promoted to senior manager.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Sudhir. Thanks for hopping in. And thanks for the vote of confidence as well. Awesome. Shiva, did you have a question?
Yes, thanks, Soham, for giving me the stage. So basically, I wanted to understand, to what extent are big tech willing to honor the leveling that's followed in, let's say, a smaller company. For example, let's say I'm a tech lead or an engineering manager at maybe a 40 or 50% startup. Will big tech be open to hiring me at the same level? I understand that it is gated on interview performance, among other things, but how does it usually go? Are candidates like down leveled upon interviews? Just want to understand that better. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure. Did you? We discussed some of that fairly elaborately early on. Did you happen to join a little bit late? Is that what happened, or were you there earlier as well?
No, I did join a bit late. So if you've already discussed that, then maybe a brief recap would be good. Don't need to go into too much detail. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, generally why don't you repeat the question succinctly as well, so that we know exactly where to focus on.
Sure. So I just want to understand, if let's say I'm a tech lead at a smaller company, maybe a 50% company, can I expect to be hired as a tech lead at a big company, providing the interview goes well, or will I be down leveled in general?
So see, in general, many companies do down level if you don't come from a peer company. But again, it's a complex thing, very subjective as well. What we had discussed earlier was it depends quite a bit on how you describe the scope of your current role. It is less about the size of the company. It is more about what the company does and what is your role in those projects and how you then describe it. And certainly, so that's one important data point. The other important data point is the number of years of experience you have. Right? And between those two, largely, and given the guidelines of the company, recruiter decides the level first, right? And then obviously they bounce it off with the hiring manager if there's a change that happens, and then the interview panel is set, and then they go from there. So do they always down level? No, not necessarily. They often do, especially at higher levels. Like if you are a CTO at a smaller company, you're not going to be CTO at a tier 1 company like a Facebook or a Google and such. And so with that token, just imagining it's flowing relatively down. Yes, there is some down leveling, but it's not like completely as part of the process and such. Like at levels 3, 4, 5, 6, and such, and 7, you do have a lot of wiggle room where you can just describe the scope of your work and your number of years of experience, and so combined, they can decide the level versus just straightforward down or up leveling. Yeah. So that is what we largely discussed earlier.
Okay, cool.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Satya, did you have a question?
Yeah, so thanks for letting me in. So I am Satya. I work as a senior engineering manager at Samsung. At least for the past 3 years, I've been a senior engineering manager. So what I'm trying to do is, like, I'm trying to apply for different companies. I'm really not sure whether to apply as an engineering manager or a senior engineering manager, because I was checking in levels.fyi. I don't see for some of the companies, like, we don't get enough information on what level should we be applying for. So that's how do we figure that out? That is one question. And the other question is about if at all we apply and we go through the process, how do we know if some company even does down leveling, or how do we handle that? I mean, do they even do down leveling? So how do we know that kind of thing? Those are my questions.
Yeah, sorry. Was somebody else speaking? No, okay. And Satya, largely the same answer as that I had given Shiva, but this is management. So maybe there's a little bit of a different perspective. Doris, do you have a perspective there, or Sudhir, and even Anthony?
Yeah. So I mean, the biggest difference between like a manager and a senior manager, right? Like in FANG, they would call it M1 versus M2. So a senior manager is generally a manager of managers, with the caveat that it's a tier 1 company. You might be a manager of managers in a smallish company, right? But maybe you would get down leveled. But if you're M2 at Google, they will likely try to match you to that. So that is the biggest difference between M1 and M2.
That's right. But how do we find out in like smaller companies, like which is not even so for example, like Roblox or something, like we couldn't even find out those kind of things in the levels FOA or something. So how do we figure out while applying is what I was trying to figure out.
Yeah, smaller companies are a little bit trickier because it depends on if they have a core HR team that has clearly defined this for them. So I noticed with smaller startups and smaller orgs, it's kind of a touch and go, right? And what I mean by that is they're almost relying on you as well as the candidate interview pool that they're meeting out there to determine what makes most sense as it pertains to level and compensation and all that. So at smaller companies, the data points that they have are the conversations that they're having in real time. So I think that's what makes it a little bit tricky and hard, because there isn't necessarily a formula for smaller companies all the time, because they're just kind of figuring it out as they go. So that's what I mean by the touch and go side.
Got it. Should I just be asking about for down leveling? So while talking to the recruiter for my second question, like, so will you be down leveling, or is that the only way to go?
So actually companies in good practice don't necessarily down level as a philosophy. So maybe if you're asking that question, do you down level? I don't even know if they'll kind of know what you're exactly speaking to. Down leveling. So maybe I would just focus on this is my type of experience as a manager. This is how much I'm involved in the strategic planning or whatever the case may be. And then just having an open conversation on what is your comp philosophy, because they probably have one, and then just starting with them, let them come to you with what their compensation philosophy is, and then kind of navigate the conversation from there. Because I don't necessarily think that companies kind of go into it with, we're going to down level folks coming in.
Got it.
Yeah,
Thanks. So there,
sure. So few thoughts here, Satya. So first question for you is, what is, when you say senior manager at Samsung, right? What exactly is the scope? And this is kind of, some of the things which Soham touched on in some of the earlier questions, right? What is your scope, right? And
managers.
Is it a team of 20? Is it a team of 50? Like, you that is the first question, right?
Sure.
And then how does it map, in terms of complexity, what is the complexity of the role you're doing, and what is the impact that you're having? And you take all of that, and then you want to see how it maps into the company you're targeting, right? Now, each company, based on the leveling guidelines, it might be slightly different. So what you want to do is you want to actually reach out to people. Just reach out to people on LinkedIn, get a sense of, hey, this is what I'm doing. What do you think I should do, right? And when you do that kind of networking, it helps in two ways. One, it helps you figure out what they're looking for. And the second thing, they might actually refer you to positions as well, right? And I think the third point I wanted to say was, you want to aim higher, right? You don't want to put yourself in a box, right? So you can aim higher, and then you can get it, let's say you go through the interview process and the interview panel doesn't think that you are at that level, then you'd probably get an offer at a lower level, right? Because the reality is the levels themselves are a band, right? And then it's not You could get into one level, but you could be on the higher end, or you could get into the next level and you could be on the lower end, right? So it's a little tricky there. But those would be the high level, very three things I would kind of think about, going about it.
Is people management the only focus for a senior engineering manager? Because like we do manage I have like geographically distributed teams as well. They might not directly report to me. I do have like 15 plus members. But I do take care of large projects interacting with like different business cross countries. So generally, like, do they consider that in like different companies, or do they focus only on people?
Based on the pitch that you made right now, that's not a senior engineering manager pitch for a FANG company. At least that's my opinion. But yeah,
makes sense. So, you're absolutely right. I'm going to second that. So the bigger companies, it is a lot about people management. So as an engineering manager is a very hybrid beast, where you have to be business savvy, you have to be people savvy, you have to be part economist, part psychologist, all of that mixed into one. But think about this, right? To take care of the product, there is a product manager, right? To take care of coding, there is a tech lead and there are engineers. Right? Take care of timelines, there are TPMs. Right? Then what the heck are you going to do, right? As an engineering manager, right? You have to bring this together, and that is just people job, right? Largely, it's a people job. So you have to take care of conflicts within the team. You have to take care of growing the people. You have to take care of setting expectations, influencing sideways and up, all of that. I mean, it's a largely a people management role. And the reason you need to be technical, it's called engineering manager, because otherwise you will not be able to speak properly with anybody in their language. So, but it is largely a people management role, right, on this. And just a lot of people, right? When one has to be, all of them have to be shepherded every day. Every day you wake up in the morning and say, how do I get the best out of the team that I have? Right? You're not asking the question, what is the best product being delivered? That the product manager is asking that in the same morning. You're not thinking about how do I deliver this exactly on time and how do I give visibility and such. Like TPM is thinking about that, right? But your thought top of mind is, how do I get the most out of this team? How do I keep them really, really motivated so that we can achieve all the goals of the company? So generally it is leaning to people management. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Awesome. Finally, Pega, how are you? You have a question?
Yes, thanks for this talk. It was really helpful. So I just have one question about what was mentioned about asking for additional interviews to potentially get an offer at a higher level. Let's say you have interviewed for L5 and you have done well, they are willing to give you an offer for that, but then you think, maybe I should ask the recruiter what it takes for them to consider me for L6, and they say you need to do an additional system design interview. So I just want to know, is there any downside to that? Let's say if you do really bad in that additional interview, is there a risk that they completely change their mind about giving you an offer even for L5? I mean, should you always ask for them? If you did well in your L5 interview, should you always ask if they can consider you for L6? And basically just what's the risk for that?
I think there's always a risk because it's another evaluation and data point. And so I think it's also important for people to remember that it's the offer is not said and done until you sign the offer. And there's also a risk in how you negotiate because the company can always renege their offer. And so I do think that there's always a risk associated with that. Now, let's say you take that next interview and you get close, but you're not quite there yet, then perfect. That's absolutely fine. But let's say you completely bomb it and they're getting signal from you in a negative way where now they're questioning if you'll be able to come in at the level that they were initially offering you or thinking of you for, then that's it. So I guess it depends on your confidence and your abilities.
Yeah, and to add to that, right, I would say even if you got an offer, right, don't assume that you scored 100% in all your interviews. There is a chance people had failed one coding round, right, and did borderline on behavior and maybe borderline on one system, but did well in another system. They could still get an offer. But let's say your third system goes really bad, and if you average everything out now, right, it kind of looks bad. So maybe, you ideally shouldn't assume you scored 100% if you got an offer in the previous interviews.
+1. That's a really, really good point.
Really good point. Yes. And to what Doris had said, like, there is always a risk in that sense. Though I think many of these are so to speak first world problems. You have the perspective that vast majority of people couldn't even reach that stage. So that is in itself a privilege, and just take it as it comes. If you're in that situation, there is very little you can do about it, and just prepare and go. So there's always a risk, but there is always a risk even driving the car, right? But we take it every day. This is less risk than that. So awesome. Thank you, everybody. This was a lot of fun. I wish we could just keep going and going, but I think we have to end. We'll meet again next Thursday with something else. Thank you very much, Anthony, Doris, Sudhir, Nick, Prasid, Steph, all of you coming in, stepping in. Very interesting conversations. I think this is something that I think we can break it down to like multiple different topics and have multiple different types of sessions on this. So, wonderful insights. Thanks again taking this time and coming in and sharing your insights.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thanks for having us. And for all the folks out there, if you haven't already, please follow our club. We have lots of events like this. We'd love to see you there. Feel free to follow all the speakers as well for more insights like this. Have a good night.
Awesome. Have a very good night. See you next Thursday.